Hello, I'm Ken Wells. I was a police officer for 30 years, and for the past 12 years, I've been the curator of the Thames Valley Police Museum here at Salmstead. When I retired, I then took up the position of a volunteer helping out in the museum. Taking you back to the 1800s, when a lady had a child, whether she be out of wedlock or even if she was married, sometimes it was difficult to look after that child. There was no free, safe abortion. Illegitimacy was rife and there was no birth control. So she only had two options, either to send that child to an orphanage or she gave it to a foster mother. I'd like to introduce you now to Mrs. Dyer, who is also known as a baby farmer. Ladies would often reply to adverts that Mrs. Dyer had put into the paper offering to take their child for a small fee, usually 10 to 20 pounds. And when they handed the child over, the clothing and everything else connected to it was handed over as well. There were conditions that they were able to come and visit the child as and when they wanted. Dyer started her notorious career right down in Bristol when she would put adverts into the local paper offering to adopt a child for a fee. In 1895, she moves to Berkshire, and an advert appears in the Newbury Weekly News which stated, "Wanted, care or nurse child, would have a good home, healthy neighbourhood, good references can be given. Apply AB Aldworth." Let's move forward to 1896 and the location Caversham, Reading in Berkshire. Let's focus on the River Thames in the vicinity of where it meets the River Kennet. Here we have a bargeman navigating his craft along the river when he pulls up on the end of his pole a brown paper package. Upon opening it, it contains the body of a baby girl who had been strangled with a cord around its neck. To weigh the package down was a house brick. Now, the package had only been in the water a matter of days, and when the police examined it, they could work out some faint writing, and it read, "Mrs. Dyer, Pickett's Road, Caversham." Oh, what a wonderful clue. They descended on Pickett's Road immediately, only to find that Mrs. Dyer had moved on. They found adverts as far afield as Bristol, Gloucestershire, Newcastle upon Tyne, London, which indicated the sheer magnitude of the crime that Mrs. Dyer had committed. Reading Borough Police were joined by Superintendent Chewsley of the Metropolitan Police. It was painfully apparent that Chewsley had enough evidence to put Mrs. Dyer on trial, and a great deal of police time was to be spent unravelling the complicated web that she had spun. Now, Dyer was arrested on the 3rd of April 1896 and charged with the murder of one Helena Fry, the daughter of Mary Fry. And here in the museum we have the actual charge sheet. And the charge sheet reads, "Did feloniously, wilfully, and of her own malice aforethought, kill and murder a certain female infant, Helena Fry, the daughter of one Mary Fry." Although Mrs. Dyer is denying all knowledge, she's then informed that her son-in-law, Arthur Palmer, who is married to her daughter Polly, has been implicated, and he has been charged with being an accessory. Evidence began to be collected, and over 40 infant bodies were retrieved from the River Thames. 17 of these could be connected to Mrs. Dyer. Prison life did not agree with her, and she asked for prison notepaper to write a letter to her son-in-law Arthur and also to her daughter Polly. And we in the museum have the actual letter here. And it reads, "My poor dear Arthur, oh how my heart aches for you and my dear Polly. And I'm sending this to tell you I have eased my mind and I've made a full statement. I've told them the truth and nothing but the whole truth. As I hope to be forgiven, God Almighty is my judge. And I dare not go into his presence with a lie. I do hope and pray God will forgive me. And I had a letter from Polly. She's coming down. You will have a lawyer, but for myself, it is not only throwing money away. I have done this awful thing. And I know that I alone shall have to answer for it. I have just wrote a long letter to Willie, another to Father. Also, I have wrote out a truth and faithful statement of everything. I hope God will give you both grace and strength to bear this awful trial. God bless you, my dear boy, your broken-hearted mother, A. Dyer. Let me just have one line on Friday. She now appears again before the Reading Borough Court, charged with the additional murders of the other infants that have been taken from the River Thames. Now, police produced witnesses to state that they had seen children going in and out of Kensington Road and also Pickett's Road, but none of these infants were ever seen again. But one important witness is a Mr. Albert Charles Cullum, and he lived in Willesden in London. And he states that Mrs. Dyer had paid in advance for her daughter Polly and her son-in-law Arthur to lodge in his house. Now, Mr. Cullum had had a fireplace removed from inside his house, and the surplus bricks had been stacked outside in his garden. A detective produced some of the bricks used to weigh down the bodies in the River Thames. And Mr. Cullen positively identifies them as coming from his house. The reason being that in those days, bricks were handmade, and invariably the brickmaker would sometimes put his initials inside or on the brick. A letter of confession was produced to the court, which Mrs. Dyer had written to Superintendent Tuesday. And here in the museum, we have the actual letter. And the letter reads as follows: to the Chief Superintendent of Police. Sir, will you kindly grant me the favour of presenting this to the magistrates on Saturday, the 18th inst. I've made this statement out, for I may not have the opportunity then. I must relieve my mind. I do not know, and I feel my days are numbered on this earth, but I do feel it is an awful thing drawing innocent people into trouble. I do know I shall have to answer before my Maker on heaven for this awful crime I've committed, but as God Almighty is my judge in heaven as on earth, neither my daughter, Mary Ann Palmer, or her husband, Arthur Ernest Palmer, I must solemnly declare that neither of them had anything at all to do with it. They never knew I contemplated doing such a thing until it was too late. I am speaking the truth and nothing but the truth, as I hope to be forgiven. I myself and none alone must stand before my Maker in heaven to give an answer for it all, witnessed by my hand, Amelia Dyer. Dyer was sent for trial at the Old Bailey, and the evidence was overwhelming. And the trial was over very quickly. In fact, the jury only took 5 minutes to find her guilty of willful murder. Mr. Justin Hawkins pronounced sentence of death on Mrs. Dyer, and she was sent to Newgate Prison to wait execution. Mrs. Dyer's executioner was one James Billington, and he'd come to Newgate to execute 3 male persons plus Mrs. Dyer. Billington weighed Mrs. Dyer to determine how far the drop needed to be to ensure instant death. She weighed 15 stone and she was 57 years of age. Shortly before 9 o'clock on the 10th of June, 1896, Billington took Mrs. Dyer to the scaffold. It was only a matter of a few yards. Dyer was placed in a position under the beam, and the noose and the cap were adjusted by Billington. Mrs. Dyer had to be supported by 2 wardens. Billington then pulled the lever, and she fell without a hitch, and the wretched woman died instantly. In 1897, the Life Protection Act was passed. In 1908, this became known as the Children's Act, which stated that if you wanted to adopt a child, for any reason, you had to notify the local authority. Mrs. Dyer turns out to be one of the most notorious female killers this country has ever known.